Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. The colonization of vast majority of Muslim lands led to the colonization of minds, and this is the burning problem currently facing the Ummah. How can we decolonize our minds? This was the subject of a complete talk which is linked in both English and Urdu later on in these slides. This talk is the first segment of the full talk. This is just a picture of how the world was conquered in the early 20th century. About 90% of the globe was under European influence. Because the Europeans conquered, they got to write history. So stories of massive brutality, genocide, violence, and barbaric behavior came out as the attempt to civilize the ignorant and barbaric savages living outside of Europe, which is exactly the opposite of the truth. One of the most important books of the 20th century is Orientalism by Edward Said, which basically analyzes how European minds were shaped by this global conquest, and they acquired a superiority complex, and they are unable to talk about the East as an objective reality. They always portray it as inferior and themselves as superior. Just as the history of global conquest has shaped the minds of the West, so also it has shaped the minds of the East. We all live in a world where our minds and thoughts are shaped by history without our conscious awareness of this. Just to illustrate this abstraction, this is my picture when I was young, and it shows that I have long hair and no beard. Now, if somebody had asked me at that time why I have long hair, I would have said, I like it, other people are doing it, and so I'm doing it. I would not have been aware that this was actually a countercultural movement created by the Vietnam War, in which thousands of American youth were killed, and they protested against this establishment, and they rejected the traditional values which supported the war, and they argued for make love, not war, and they grew long hair as a symbol of their protest. So I had no idea that this history had led to my long hair, and similarly I don't have a beard, even though that is the norm in the Islamic society, because of the global conquest, which led us to admire Western ways over our own cultural traditions. But I'm wearing a kurta and a traditional dress, and this shows that this shows my rejection of domination and my resistance and my attachment to our traditional culture. The key insight to understand is that colonization is not so much about the physical conquest as it is about the conquest of the minds. At the height of the British Empire, only 1,000 white people were governing millions of population, and they could not do so without the consent of this population. And the consent is created by educating these minds to believe in the superiority of the West and the inferiority of their own selves, and to believe that there are no alternatives, that they have to live inside the box and think inside the box. But colonization ended 70 years ago, so how can we claim that colonization of minds continues today? To answer this question, we have to understand how the colonization of minds takes place, and takes place by the means of a Western education. And today Western education is much more powerful than it was before. When you go through a Western education, you learn that all knowledge comes from the Western intellectual tradition. There is no mention of any intellectual from any other tradition. No Al-Ghazali, Ibn al-Haytham, Al-Kindi, Farabi, Ibn Sina, Biruni. So we learn by example that whatever these people did, it's no longer relevant for the modern world, and all useful knowledge today was developed by European intellectuals, and in particular, especially important for Muslims, the Quran is never mentioned, so it means that the Quran is no longer relevant for our problems of today. The Quran cannot guide us out of our current darkness. This is the lesson of a Western education. To recover our faith in Islam, we must decolonize our minds, but this is a very difficult job. And the first step is to acquire self-awareness. What are the thoughts that have been planted into our minds? And so basically the global conquest immediately demonstrate that the West is superior and we are inferior, West is developed, we are underdeveloped, West is civilized, we are ignorant and barbaric savages, West has advanced scientific knowledge, we have only primitive superstitions. The effects of having these beliefs can be illustrated by Salman Rushdie. In his novel Shame, he ridicules his own family and kinfolk and traditions. In Midnight's Children, he ridicules his own culture and nation. And in Satanic Verses, he ridicules his own religion and heritage. So this deep-seated inferiority complex is something which all of us who get a Western education acquire in a lesser or greater degree. We can put colonization in a nutshell. Islam teaches us that the whole mankind was in ignorance and darkness until Allah Ta'ala revealed His complete and perfect message to our Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and it was illustrated and put into practice by himself and his companions. And so the sun of guidance arose 1450 years ago and enlightened the world. As opposed to this, a Western education which makes no mention of these things says that mankind was in darkness and ignorance until the sun of reason rose in the West and dazzled the world with its brilliance. So basically colonization involves leaving the Islamic worldview and accepting the Western worldview, and decolonization involves abandoning the Western worldview and accepting the Islamic worldview. To reject the Western worldview, we need to understand it better. According to their view, Europeans are uniquely rational, intelligent, scientific, honest, honorable. They have all good qualities, while the rest of the world consists of animals. So in particular, up until quite late in the 20th century, there were human zoos which displayed human beings from other countries as just like animals. Like there is a picture of a zoo in Belgium in 1958 World Fair where a little girl is being fed by one of the onlookers. In a brilliant novel by George Orwell, 1984, he depicts a world in which the whole population is under mind control. And basically mind control takes place by taking apart human minds into pieces and putting them back together into the desired mold. And this is exactly what has been done to the colonized mind. And then the insight is that once the mind is colonized, it can never become conscious, and if it can't become conscious, it cannot be rebel. So it's only later that we will understand that these minds were actually in our power and control, and we could have changed our thoughts if we wanted to, but we never desired to be free. And basically that's because the choice for mankind lies between freedom and happiness, and we can just choose to go along with everything else and be happy. Or if we choose to be free, then we have to revolt against the entire system. And this is a difficult and challenging path, which requires great sacrifices and courage. So this segment of the talk was basically concerned with explaining the meaning of colonization and how it is done. And later segments we will discuss what we can do to overcome this. Some references are linked in this last slide.